Philosophers have tried to explain existence for thousands of years. But there is one question nobody asked correctly until 1927. Not what exists, not why anything exists, but what does it mean for something to exist at all? That year, a 37-year-old professor at the University of Marburg published a book that would shatter philosophy. His name was Martin Heidegger. The book was Being in Time. And the way he understood being was so radical that even now, almost a century later, most people still miss the point. You probably think you understand what it means for something to be. A hammer is, a table is, you are simple enough. But Heidegger saw something philosophers had forgotten since the ancient Greeks. Being is not just one thing. There are different ways of being. And the way you relate to things changes what they are, not what they seem to be, what they actually are in their being. This insight destroyed 2,000 years of philosophy built on one mistake. The mistake that subjects look at objects, that your mind is here, the world is there, and you need to bridge the gap. Heidegger called this the Cartesian trap. René Descartes said it in the 1600s, and Western thought walked straight into it. If you value documented philosophy and intellectual history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. Also, this script is researched and factual, using sources from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, published January 31st, 2025, and Cambridge University Press's Cambridge Companion to Heidegger from 2013, which provide detailed scholarly analysis of Heidegger's fundamental ontology and the historical context of Being in Time's publication. Now, back to the information. Being in Time appeared in spring 1927 in a journal edited by Edmund Husserl, 437 pages in the German edition. Heidegger dedicated it to Husserl with the words, "in friendship and admiration." That dedication would be removed in 1941 under Nazi pressure, restored in 1953. The book earned Heidegger full professorship at Marburg by fall 1927. 1 year later, the chair at Freiburg when Husserl retired. Within 5 years, philosophers across Germany recognized it as epoch-making. But what did it actually say? Start with Dasein, German for being there. Heidegger uses it as the term for human existence. Not consciousness, not mind, not subject. Dasein. You're not a thinking thing looking at the world. You are already in the world before you think about it. Being in the world is not a property you have. It is what you are. Heidegger writes this with hyphens, being in the world, to show it as one unified phenomenon. You cannot be without a world. The world cannot show up without you. This is the first move that breaks Descartes. But Heidegger goes deeper. How does the world show up? 2 ways, ready to hand and present at hand. In German, Zuhanden and Vorhanden, when you use a hammer, you do not look at it. You hammer. The hammer disappears into the task. It becomes an extension of your body. That is ready to hand. The hammer exists as part of a whole network of tasks and purposes. Nails, wood, the house you're building, the reasons you need shelter. The hammer is for hammering nails into wood for building. It exists in this web of meaning. This is its being. Now the head flies off. Suddenly you notice the hammer. It sits there as an object with properties, weight, length, material, that is present at hand. The theoretical stance, what scientists study, but Heidegger insists, and this is crucial, the ready to hand is more basic. The present at hand is what happens when the ready to hand breaks down. Philosophy. Since Descartes got it backwards. It started with present at hand objects and tried to explain how we relate to them. But we already relate. We are always already using, caring, engaged. The hammer is not an object we represent in consciousness. The hammer is equipment we use without thinking until we cannot. This applies to everything. Heidegger gives the example from being and time. The sun, whose light and warmth are in everyday use, has its own places. Sunrise, midday, sunset, midnight. The house has its sunny side and its shady side. The way it is divided up into rooms is orientated towards these. Even the sun exists ready to hand for Dasein, not as a star 93 million miles away burning hydrogen, as the thing that gives light and warmth that we use. Only when we adopt a theoretical stance does the sun become present at hand, an object with mass and temperature and gravitational pull. But if you are always already in the world, using things, caring about tasks, then who are you? Not some abstract self. You are what you do. Heidegger calls this care, Sorge in German. Care is the structure of your being. 3 parts working together: facticity, existentiality, fallenness. Facticity is thrownness, Geworfenheit. You did not choose to be born. You were thrown into a specific family, culture, language. historical moment. You find yourself already here. The past that shaped you was not your choice. This is your facticity, the weight of the given. Existentiality is projection. Entwerf. You're always projecting yourself into possibilities. What you might do, what you could become. The future opens to you as a field of options. You choose among them. You make yourself by choosing. But here is the catch. You project from your thrownness. Your possibilities are already limited by where you were thrown. A peasant in medieval France faces different options than a software engineer in Silicon Valley. Your future grows from your past, whether you like it or not. And fallenness? For fall, you get absorbed in the world, lost in tasks, distracted by what anyone does, the anyone self, das Man. You do what one does. You think what one thinks. You become nobody in particular. Average, public, leveled down. Heidegger describes this in Being and Time. They accommodates Dasein in its tendency to take things easily and make them easy. You give up responsibility. You let the crowd decide. This is everyday existence. Inauthentic, not your own. Most people live like this most of the time. That is not a moral judgment. Heidegger insists he is describing structure, not prescribing behavior, but the language is hard to read neutrally. Inauthentic Dasein is, not itself, loses itself, becomes self-alienated. The they-self is the nobody to whom every Dasein has already surrendered itself. You do what everyone does, and therefore nobody does it. No one is responsible. They decides, and the they is no one. Against this, authenticity, Eigentlichkeit. From eigen, own, being your own, not getting in touch with some inner self. Heidegger is not a romantic. Authenticity is taking responsibility for your choices, owning your life. How? Through anxiety? Angst, different from fear. Fear has an object. You fear the bear, the exam, the diagnosis. Anxiety has no object. It is the mood in which you experience your being as a whole. Everything becomes strange. The world loses its meaning. Tasks that mattered feel pointless. In anxiety, Heidegger writes, the world has the character of completely lacking significance. Anxiety reveals that you are thrown into a world with no ultimate ground. Nothing justifies your existence. Nothing guarantees meaning. You are radically free and radically responsible. This is terrifying. Most people flee back into the they, distraction, busyness, conformity, anything to avoid the vertigo of groundlessness. But if you face anxiety, if you hold steady, you can choose yourself, not just what you do, but that you do it. You own your existence and death. Being toward death, sien zum Tode. Death is your own most possibility. No one can die for you. No one can take your death away. It is the one possibility that is absolutely yours. And it is certain, and it is indefinite. You will die. You do not know when. In Being and Time, Heidegger argues that anticipating death, not brooding about it, but holding it as your horizon, liberates you. When you face your finitude, you stop pretending your life goes on forever. You stop doing what anyone does because that is what one does. You choose what matters to you in the time you have. Heidegger is not talking about clinical death. Being toward death is not about the moment you stop breathing. It is a way of existing, living with awareness that your time is finite, that your possibilities will close, that eventually there will be no more future. This awareness individualizes you, throws you back on yourself, forces you to decide what your life means because it will end, and no one else can give it meaning for you. Resoluteness, Entschlossenheit, the response to anxiety and death. Heidegger defines it. Resoluteness means letting oneself be summoned out of one's lostness in the they. You retrieve yourself from the crowd, you take over your own existence, you become authentic. But, and this is critical, you do not leave the world. You do not abandon other people. You remain in the they, but modified. You still do everyday tasks. You still use hammers and build houses. But now you own it. You choose it. The difference is not what you do. The difference is how you do it. In authenticity, you are responsible. Time, temporality, Zeitlichkeit. This is where Heidegger thinks he has found the key. Being is temporal. Not that being exists in time, like events on a timeline. Being is time unfolding. Dasein is essentially temporal, 3 directions at once. The future as your possibilities projecting forward. The past as your facticity pressing back. The present as your engagement with what is ready to hand. These are not 3 separate moments. They are 3 aspects of one structure. Ecstatic temporality, standing outside yourself in all 3 directions simultaneously. Heidegger calls this the ecstatic unity of temporality. The future is primary. You are always ahead of yourself, projecting into what might come, but you project from what has been. Your past makes certain futures possible and closes others, and you are already engaged with the present. Using tools, handling tasks, future, past, present, they form a unified happening. That happening is you, your time-taking place. Being and Time, published 1927, argues that temporality is the meaning of being for Dasein, and if you understand Dasein's temporality. You can ask about being in general, but Heidegger never finished. Being and Time was supposed to have 6 sections. He published 2. Division 1, Preparatory Analysis of Dasein. Division 2, Dasein and Temporality. He planned Division 3, Time and Being. That section would have moved from Dasein's temporality to being itself. Then a whole second part, Destruction of the History of Ontology, taking apart Kant, Descartes, Aristotle, showing how they missed the question of being. None of it appeared. Heidegger abandoned the project. Why? Scholars debate this. Some say he hit a philosophical wall. The method of being and time could not do what he wanted. Others point to practical pressures. He needed to publish fast to secure his professorship at Marburg. The committee met June 24th, 1925. They wanted a publication. Heidegger rushed Being and Time to press. By 1929, his lectures show him moving away from the book's framework. The Origin of the Work of Art, written 1936, published 1950, takes a different approach. No more fundamental ontology. Now, the historical unfolding of being through epochs. This becomes the so-called turn, die Kehre. Early Heidegger focuses on Dasein. Late Heidegger focuses on being's history. The question shifts from how Dasein understands being to how being reveals itself through history. Not what you do to disclose being, but how being sends itself to you. Language becomes central. Poetry, art, not analysis. The later Heidegger writes in a style that frustrates analytic philosophers. Cryptic, oracular. But he is trying to think being without making it an object, without forgetting the ontological difference. The ontological difference. Heidegger's term for the distinction between being and beings. Beings are entities. This hammer, that tree, you, me. Being is what makes beings intelligible as beings. It is not another being. It is the clearing in which beings show up. Heidegger accuses Western metaphysics of forgetting this difference. Plato treats being as the highest being, the form of the good. Aristotle treats being as substance. Medieval theology treats being as God, and Descartes treats being as the res cogitans, or res extensa. All of them make being into a being. The highest, the most real, the ground, but still a being. This forgetting has consequences. If being is just the most general property of all entities, then you can study it scientifically. You can categorize beings, measure them, explain them causally. You treat everything as present at hand, object for subject, resource for use. Heidegger calls this inframing, Gestell, the technological understanding of being. Everything becomes standing reserve, raw material. The river becomes energy potential for the hydroelectric plant. The forest becomes timber and real estate. Human beings become human resources. Everything gets calculated, optimized, controlled. Heidegger sees this as the culmination of metaphysics, not a mistake. The destiny of Western thought. It starts with Plato's forms, continues through Christian theology, explodes into modern science and technology. By the 20th century, the world is entirely inframed. Everything is value. Everything is for something. Nothing just is. And being itself is forgotten. We are so busy manipulating beings that we never ask what being means. This is why being and time matters. It tries to recover the question of being before metaphysics buried it. Heidegger goes back to the pre-Socratics, Heraclitus, Parmenides, Anaximander. The Greeks, who thought about being before Plato, systematized everything. Heidegger reads them as poets of being. They experience being's strangeness, its mystery. Then Plato comes along and turns mystery into system. Being becomes idea, presence, stability. The forgetting begins. But Heidegger himself is ambiguous. He wants to overcome metaphysics, but he uses metaphysical language. He wants to think being without objectifying it, but the analytic of Dasein still makes Dasein the center. Early Heidegger says being is disclosed through Dasein. That sounds like making Dasein the subject and being the object. Later, Heidegger backs away from this. He says Dasein is not the author of being. Being sends itself. Dasein receives, but the shift is never entirely clear. Readers argue about whether early and late Heidegger contradict or develop each other. The influence is undeniable. Jean-Paul Sartre read Being and Time in 1933. It shapes Being and Nothingness, published 1943. Sartre's existentialism, Existence precedes essence, radical freedom, bad faith, all grow from Heideggerian soil. But Sartre makes it humanist. Heidegger hates this. In his letter on humanism, written 1946, published 1947, he attacks Sartre explicitly. Sartre missed the point. Being and time is not about human freedom. It is about being. Maurice Merleau-Ponty takes Heidegger's ready to hand and builds a phenomenology of perception around it. The body is not an object you have. The body is how you are in the world. You perceive with your body before you think about perception. Hannah Arendt, Heidegger's student and lover in Marburg, uses his analysis of everydayness to think about politics, the banality of evil, how ordinary people do monstrous things by doing what anyone does. Hans-Georg Gadamer develops hermeneutics from Heidegger's concept of understanding. Understanding is not a mental act. It is the way Dasein is. You understand by being in a tradition, interpreting texts, fusing horizons. Jacques Derrida deconstructs Heidegger. Pushes the ontological difference further. Shows how Heidegger still privileges presence even while criticizing it. Michel Foucault uses Heidegger to think about power and history, the way discourses shape what can be said and known in an epoch. American philosophers pick it up too. Hubert Dreyfus teaches Heidegger at Berkeley for decades, makes it accessible to analytic philosophers. Richard Rorty uses Heidegger to attack representationalism, mind as mirror of nature. Rorty says no, mind is a set of practices. Truth is what works. Heidegger helps him get there. Charles Taylor builds a social ontology on Heideggerian foundations. The self is not a lonely subject. The self is constituted by the social world it inhabits. But there is a problem, a big one. In 1933, Heidegger joined the Nazi Party. May 1st, 1933. Member number 3,125,090. On May 27th, 1933, he became rector of Freiburg University. In his rectoral address, delivered on that day, he talks about the spiritual mission of the German university. He invokes the German people finding its destined form. He stays rector for 10 months, resigns April 23rd, 1934, but he keeps his party membership until 1945 when the party dissolved. How much did Nazism shape his philosophy? Scholars fight over this. Some say Being in Time already contains fascist themes. The critique of Das Man sounds like a critique of liberal individualism. The call for authentic community sounds like Volk. The emphasis on destiny and heritage and rootedness, Bodenständigkeit, all of this fits Nazi ideology. Others say no. Being and time is politically neutral. It describes existential structures universal to human beings. Any political reading is projection. Then, in 2014, the Black Notebooks appear. Schwarze Hefte, Heidegger's private journals from the 1930s and 40s. In them, anti-Semitism. Heidegger writes about world Jewry and its role in modernity's forgetting of being. He connects Judaism with rootlessness and calculation. With the technological and framing of the world, scholars call this ontological anti-Semitism, not just ethnic prejudice, making Jewishness into a metaphysical category, the embodiment of metaphysics itself. This changes how we read him. Can you separate the philosophy from the politics? Some say yes. The analysis of Dasein stands on its own. The critique of Cartesianism is valid regardless of Heidegger's politics. Others say no. The politics run through the philosophy. The whole project is contaminated. The debate continues. What is certain? Heidegger never recanted, never apologized, never admitted moral error. In 1945, the French occupying forces banned him from teaching. He was not allowed to teach again until 1951, 6 years later. In interviews late in life, he minimized his involvement. Claimed he tried to save the university from worse elements. Few believe this, so what do we do with him? Ignore him? That seems impossible. Being in Time is one of the most influential philosophy books of the 20th century. It shaped continental philosophy for 3 generations. You cannot understand existentialism, phenomenology, hermeneutics, deconstruction without Heidegger. Do we read him critically? Acknowledge the insights while condemning the man? That seems necessary but insufficient. Because the insights might be tied to the politics in ways we have not fully traced. Here's what Heidegger did get right. He showed that the subject-object split is not fundamental. You are not a mind looking at a world. You are already engaged with the world before any looking starts. He showed that things have different ways of being. A hammer used is not the same as a hammer studied. The difference is ontological, not just epistemological. He showed that time is not a container you exist in. Time is how you exist. Your being is temporal through and through. He showed that you are not self-sufficient. You are thrown into a world you did not make. Your possibilities come from a past you did not choose. You are always already influenced by others, by language, by history. But you are also free. You can choose what to do with what has been given. You can take responsibility. You can be authentic. Or you can flee into the crowd. Do what anyone does. Lose yourself. It is up to you. And he showed that Western philosophy forgot to ask its most basic question. Not what is, but what does it mean to be? Not cataloging entities, but understanding being. 2,000 years of metaphysics treated being as if it were the most general property of all things. Heidegger said no. Being is not a property. Being is the event of disclosure, the happening in which beings show up as what they are. And this event is tied to time. Being is time unfolding. Is he right? That is harder to say. Some of his terms are brilliant. Ready to hand and present at hand capture something phenomenologists and cognitive scientists still use. Thrownness is a powerful image for the givenness of your situation. Being toward death frames finitude in a way that resonates, but other parts are obscure. What is being apart from beings? Heidegger insists they are different. But he cannot quite say what being is without falling back into metaphysics. He ends up sounding mystical, being as the clearing, the lighting, the event. Poetry instead of argument. Maybe that is the point. Maybe being cannot be said, only shown. Only experienced in moments when the ready-to-hand breaks down and you sense the strangeness of existence itself. Why is there anything? Why not nothing? Heidegger does not answer this. He says it is the wrong question. The right question is, what does it mean that there is anything at all? And that question opens an abyss. No ground, no reason. Just the fact of being, given, mysterious, finite. Critics attack him from all sides. Analytic philosophers say he is verbose and unclear. He invents terms instead of making arguments. He relies on etymologies that do not hold up. He reads the history of philosophy tendentiously. He projects his own concerns onto the Greeks. Marxists say he ignores material conditions. Everything for Heidegger is existential structure. He has no account of economics, class, labor. Feminists say he ignores gender. Dasein is supposedly neutral, but it reads as masculine. The emphasis on resoluteness, authenticity, confronting death, these are gendered norms, and the Nazi connection poisons everything. How do you take seriously a philosopher who joined the party? Gave speeches about the spiritual mission of Germany and never apologized? Some argue, judge the work, not the man. Ideas are not responsible for their author's actions. Others argue that is naive. Philosophy is not pure theory. It shapes how we see the world and act in it. If Heidegger's philosophy enabled Nazism, or worse, expressed it, then we need to reckon with that. Still, 60 years after his death, Heidegger is everywhere. In psychology, where therapists use his concept of thrownness to help clients understand their situation. In architecture, where designers think about dwelling and place. In environmental philosophy, where thinkers use his critique of inframing to resist technological domination of nature. In artificial intelligence, where researchers debate whether machines can have Dasein or whether being in the world requires a body. In literary theory, where critics analyze how texts disclose worlds. In theology, where believers and atheists both use his critique of ontotheology. In education, where teachers think about how students are always already embedded in social contexts. In law, where scholars question the subject-object framework underlying rights theory. Heidegger is inescapable. Love him or hate him. Ignore him at your peril. What makes him so influential? Part of it is historical timing. Being and time appeared just as European philosophy was fragmenting. Neo-Kantianism was dying. Logical positivism was rising, but felt cold. Existentialism was brewing. Heidegger gave people a new vocabulary. A way to talk about human existence that was not scientific but not religious either. Phenomenological, starting from lived experience, describing what it feels like to be thrown into the world, to care about things, to face death, to make choices. This resonated. Part of it is intellectual power. Whatever his flaws, Heidegger read philosophy deeply. He knew Aristotle, Kant, Hegel, Nietzsche, inside out. He took them seriously and argued with them on their own terms. He did not dismiss tradition. He deconstructed it, showed how it worked, why it failed, what it forgot. This felt rigorous even when it was obscure. He was not just inventing ideas, he was engaging the entire Western tradition, and part of it is the ideas themselves. They are strange enough to be interesting, but concrete enough to apply. Ready to hand is not abstract. You can see it when you use a pen or drive a car. Thrownness is not mystical. You feel it when you realize you did not choose your parents, your language, your historical moment. Being towards death is not morbid. It just means your time is finite, and you know it. These ideas have traction, they stick. Plus, Heidegger writes in a way that demands work. You cannot skim being and time. Every sentence is dense. Terms pile on terms. Neologisms force you to think. Reading Heidegger is labor. But it can feel like you're getting somewhere, uncovering something hidden, seeing through illusions you did not know you had. The difficulty becomes part of the appeal. If it were easy, it would not be deep. But here's the catch. Heidegger thought he was doing fundamental ontology, describing the structures of being itself. Universal, necessary, unchanging. Except he wrote from a very specific position. Male, German, educated, living in early 20th century Europe during massive social upheaval. How universal are his descriptions? Feminist scholars point out that care looks different when it includes pregnancy and child rearing. Post-colonial scholars point out that thrownness looks different when you are thrown into a colonized world. Historians point out that being toward death looks different in cultures with different conceptions of death and time. Maybe Heidegger's existential structures are not universal. Maybe they are historical, products of his moment. This would undercut the whole project. If Dasein is historically variable, then fundamental ontology is impossible. There is no one structure of being. There are only historically specific ways of being. Late Heidegger almost admits this. He talks about epochs of being. Different historical worlds with different understandings of what it means to be. The Greek world, the medieval world, the modern world. Each has its own opening. Each discloses beings differently. If that is right, then being in time is not fundamental ontology. It is a description of modern European Dasein, valuable but limited. This would explain why it sounds so existentialist. Anxiety, authenticity, individual choice, finitude, these are modern concerns. The Greeks did not think this way. Neither did medieval Christians. It is us. Our problem. Our structure of meaning. Heidegger might have discovered not being itself, but the being of modernity. And the genius, if that is the word, is that he saw it from inside. He did not stand outside modernity and critique it. He inhabited it, felt its contradictions. The way we are free but thrown, individual but social, authentic but fallen, finite but projecting into the future. These are not timeless truths. They are the truth of our time, which might make being and time more powerful, not less, a diagnosis of the present, a phenomenology of now. Whether this is what Heidegger intended is unclear. He kept insisting he was doing ontology, not anthropology. Being, not human beings, but the line is hard to draw, because being only shows up for Dasein, and Dasein is human existence. So when you describe Dasein, you describe the way being discloses itself to humans, which is historical, which changes. So being itself is historical, or just our access to it. Heidegger never quite resolved this. What he did do is force us to ask the question, and that might be enough. Before Heidegger, philosophers took being for granted. After Heidegger, you cannot. You have to ask, what does it mean for something to be? What kind of being does this have? How does it show up? In what context? For whom? These questions change how you think about everything. Science, art, technology, politics, ethics. All of it depends on how being is understood. Change that and everything shifts. So was Heidegger's understanding of being genius. It was original. It was influential. It opened doors. But genius is a dangerous word. Because Heidegger himself thought he was hearing the voice of being, responding to being's call. This made him arrogant. He dismissed other philosophers as trapped in metaphysics. He thought only he understood, and this arrogance fed his politics. The Germans have a special relation to being. The German language is uniquely suited to think being. This is nationalism disguised as ontology. Better to say, Heidegger's understanding of being was powerful and flawed. It gave us tools to think about embodiment, practice, temporality, finitude. It broke the subject-object framework that dominated modern philosophy. It showed how much of our existence is pre-theoretical, absorbed, embedded in contexts we do not choose. These insights matter. But it also came with baggage, elitism, nostalgia, nationalism, anti-Semitism. The insights and the baggage are tangled. We cannot just take the good and leave the bad. The bad might be woven into the good. What do? We read critically. We take what works and acknowledge what fails. We do not worship Heidegger. We use him. We remember the warning. Even brilliant philosophy can serve terrible politics. Even questions about being can mask questions about power. Even phenomenology can hide ideology. Heidegger is a lesson in both the power and the danger of philosophy. When it works, it changes how we see everything. When it fails, it justifies anything. In 2014, workers at Marbach im Neckar opened a vault at the German Literature Archive. Inside, boxes of black notebooks, Heidegger's journals. He left instructions, published them last. After everything else, they appeared between 2014 and 2025. Thousands of pages. In them, philosophy mixed with politics, meditations on being alongside complaints about modernity, and scattered throughout, remarks about Jews, about America, about the planetary nature of technology. Scholars are still processing what they mean. Some say the notebooks confirm the worst suspicions. Heidegger's philosophy and politics were not separable accidents. They were two sides of one project. Thinking being meant rejecting modernity. Rejecting modernity meant resisting democracy, liberalism, technology, cosmopolitanism, all of which Heidegger associated with Judaism and America. The notebooks make explicit what was implicit in being and time. Others say the notebooks are marginal. Heidegger, thinking out loud, not systematic philosophy. You do not judge a thinker by their notebooks. You judge by their published work. The notebooks add context, but do not change the core insights. The debate will not end. But one thing is clear. Heidegger saw something in 1927 that we are still grappling with. The way technology enframes the world, the way modern life alienates us from meaning, the way we lose ourselves in busyness and distraction, the way death is hidden and denied, the way we treat everything as resource. These are not past problems. They are getting worse. Climate crisis, surveillance capitalism, social media addiction, artificial intelligence, all of it flows from the technological understanding of being that Heidegger diagnosed. He thought the solution was to return to a more primordial relation to being, listen to poets, dwell in place, let things be. Many people find this naive or reactionary. You cannot just opt out of technology. You cannot return to pre-modern ways of life. The critique is correct. But the solution is fantasy. Others find it inspiring, a call to resist the reduction of everything to standing reserve, to preserve spaces where things can be what they are, not just what they are for, to remember that being is more than utility. Probably both are right. The critique stands, the solution does not, which means we are stuck with the problem and no clear way forward. Welcome to modernity. This is what thrownness feels like now. We did not choose this world. We were born into it. Technology, capitalism, environmental collapse, it was already here. We inherit it. Our possibilities are shaped by it, and we will die without resolving it. That is our facticity, but we are not helpless. We can still project. We can still choose how to respond. Heidegger would say, be authentic. Take responsibility. Do not flee into distraction. Face the situation. Accept your finitude. Choose. Easier said than done. Most of us, most of the time, are das man, doing what anyone does. Scrolling, consuming, working, complaining, lost in the they. But sometimes something breaks through. Anxiety, grief, wonder. And for a moment we see it. The strangeness of existence. The fact that we are here at all. The question of what it means to be. In those moments, maybe we understand what Heidegger was after. Not a system, not a doctrine. A way of asking. The question of being. Which is the question of meaning. Which is the question of our lives. We will not answer it, but we can keep asking. And in asking, we become more than what the world makes us. We become questioners, which is, perhaps, what Dasein always was. The being who asks about being. The being for whom being is an issue. The being whose existence is a question. Heidegger died May 26th, 1976 in Freiburg. He was 86. 2 days later he was buried in Meßkirch, his birthplace, a small town in southern Germany. He spent his childhood there. His father was a sexton in the Catholic Church. Heidegger knew craft, tradition, ritual, the rhythms of rural life. This shaped his thinking, the nostalgia for rootedness, the suspicion of urban modernity. All of it comes from Meßkirch. He left, became famous, taught at universities. But he never stopped thinking about that small town and what it represented. A world that was disappearing. A way of being that modernity was destroying. Being and time is, in part, an elegy for that world, and an attempt to save something from it. Whether he succeeded is the question we are left with. On his desk when he died, unfinished manuscripts, more attempts to think being, more circling the same question. What does it mean to be? He never stopped asking, never thought he had the final answer. Near the end of his life, in an interview with Der Spiegel magazine conducted September 1966, but published after his death in 1976, Heidegger said, "Only a God can save us now." He meant, we have gone so far into technological inframing that human effort alone cannot reverse it. We need a transformation we cannot engineer, a new sending of being. Critics called this quietism, giving up responsibility, waiting for salvation. But maybe it was just honesty, recognizing limits, admitting that some problems are bigger than us, or maybe it was evasion, a refusal to take political responsibility for the role his philosophy played in legitimating totalitarianism. You can read it either way. That is the problem with Heidegger. Everything is ambiguous, profound or dangerous, insight or ideology. You cannot escape the question, which is fitting, because escaping the question is what he thought philosophy should not do. Philosophy should ask, not solve, not reassure. Ask, keep asking, even when the asking makes you uncomfortable, even when the answers might implicate you, even when you realize you are part of the problem you are trying to diagnose. Being in time ends mid-sentence, literally. The last line of the published text is a question. Does time itself manifest itself as the horizon of being? No answer, just the question hanging there. Some say Heidegger meant to continue in the missing division 3. Others say the incompleteness is deliberate. The question of being cannot be finished. It opens onto an abyss. The harder you look, the less solid ground you find. Being recedes, withdraws, gives itself and withholds itself at once, and philosophy can do nothing but follow. Asking, always asking, never arriving. That might be Heidegger's real genius, not his answers, his questions, the way he made the familiar strange, the way he forced you to confront what you take for granted. You thought you knew what it means for something to exist. Then you read Being in Time, and you realize you have no idea. The hammer you use, the room you're in, the body you inhabit, the time that passes, all of it becomes questionable. Not in the sense of doubtful, in the sense of worth asking about, open, mysterious, mattering in a way you did not see before. And that is the gift, not a system, not certainty, but the capacity to question. To see the world not as a collection of objects, but as a happening of meaning. To understand yourself not as a subject, but as a way of being. To face your finitude, not with denial, but with resolve. To choose, knowing your throne. To project, knowing you will die. To care, knowing the world is indifferent. This is what Heidegger called authenticity. And whether you call it that or not, it is what we need now more than ever. So go back to that 37-year-old professor in Marburg. Spring 1927, a book appears, Being and Time. 437 pages. Unfinished, difficult, revolutionary, and almost a century later, we are still trying to figure out what he saw, because maybe he saw us. Our problem, our question, the way we are and the way we might be, and the difference between them, which is the difference that matters, the ontological difference, the difference between living unconsciously and living awake, between doing what anyone does and choosing what you do, between fleeing death and facing it, between forgetting being and remembering to ask. The question remains, what does it mean to be?